This week sees something totally new for the war. Not one, not two, but three Allied breakthroughs, two of them major. And that's not even all that happens this week. Basically, this week, everything happens. I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the Ottoman Army of Islam prepared for its big assault on the oil city of Baku. The Americans, backed by the French, fought and won the Battle of San Mihil. They then began the colossal task of swift redeployment to the Meuse-Argonne sector for their next attack. And over in Russia, the British advanced on the Dvina even as the Red Terror continued at home. Here's what followed. Well, on the 14th, 3,000 Ottomans and Azeris appeared at the extreme right of the Baku city defenses, but this was just a diversion. Early the next morning, a huge Ottoman attack backed by artillery took Wolf's Gate, but British field artillery and 6 armored cars prevented them from advancing. So the Ottomans instead began shelling the town and the harbor. The situation deteriorated, and British commander Lionel Dunsterville began his evacuation by the Caspian Sea. It wasn't just him, though. By 6 o'clock the next morning, over 8,000 Armenian troops and civilians had also left the port. This prompted a wave of massacres and pillaging of those remaining Armenians at the hands of the remaining Azeri population. That was in retaliation for massacres of Azeri at Armenian and Bolshevik hands back in March. Some 9,000 Armenians were now killed. It had been roughly 12,000 Azeri earlier in the year. The Ottomans entered Baku at 5 a.m. September 16th, and the months-long struggle for control of the Baku oil was finally over. The Ottomans had won. But they weren't doing so well elsewhere this week. On the 17th, on the Palestine front, an Indian sergeant deserted from British General Edmund Allenby's army and went to the Ottoman lines north of Jerusalem. He brought news that there was going to be a big British offensive beginning in 2 days' time on the coast. The Turkish commanders, including Mustafa Kemal, believed him, but German General Liman von Sanders did not and made no preparations. Now, already on the 16th, Lawrence of Arabia and the Arab Revolt had sabotaged the railway and blown the bridge between Amman and Daraa, which was necessary for moving around Ottoman reinforcements, and continued railway destruction for days. After raiding Daraa itself, they headed for Mezarib, a major Ottoman supply depot. From the station roof, Lawrence and Hubert Young cut the telegraph link between Palestine and Syria. Liman von Sanders immediately lost contact with Damascus and Constantinople, but the extent of the breakdown of communications was only revealed several days later when he finally received a message from the capital. The telegram, he recalled afterwards, inquired whether I was willing to offer a prize for a sack race in a competition in Constantinople on October 8th. At 4:30 a.m. September 19th, the British launched their long-planned offensive. The Battle of Megiddo was named by Allenby because of its biblical significance. Its Greek name is Armageddon. The British advanced on a 26-kilometer front between Rafat and the Mediterranean Sea, piercing the Ottoman lines. The British cavalry pushed forward east and northeast to cut off enemy retreat, and 3,000 prisoners were quickly taken. Von Sanders had, in fact, listened to what the deserter told him, but thought the thrust on the coast was just a decoy attack to deceive him. So when the British advanced between the sea and Turkish 8th Army headquarters at Tulkarm, the Ottoman army was totally surprised and just collapsed. Later that day, once he learned that the Arabs had cut the railway north, west, and south of Daraa, Allenby wrote to his wife, "I am beginning to think we may have a very great success." As the week ended, his men crossed the field of Armageddon, closed in on Nazareth, and entered the Jezreel Valley. Air power played a decisive part here. The RAF and Royal Australian Air Force bombed the German and Ottoman wire and phone exchanges at Nablus, Afula, and Tulkarm, which cut off all contact between von Sanders and his commanders. They also put the main German airfield out of action and had total superiority in the skies. But as I said, this was not the only major Allied breakthrough this week. The Battle of the Vardar began on the Macedonian front on the 15th. That day actually saw a new feature of the war, a Yugoslav division, a southern Slavic aggregation of Slovenes, Croats, Serbs, Bosnians, Montenegrins, and Macedonians. As they crossed the former Greco-Serbian border, they stopped the assault to embrace each other and the French soldiers fighting with them. So, 36,000 Serbs, French, Greek, and Italians from desperate Frankie's Army of the Orient went into action that day against just 12,000 Bulgarians and Germans. But the Allied artillery, while it had destroyed the barbed wire, had not put the enemy machine guns out of action. They were murderous. So the French used flamethrowers, seen on this front now for the first time, to push the enemy off 3 mountain peaks. This was the Battle of Dobro Pole, and by the end of the day, Bulgaria had lost over 40% of its forces there. By the 18th, the Allies had advanced 15 kilometers and taken over 5,000 prisoners. On the 18th, British and Greek forces attacked at Lake Doiran. It took 2 days of heavy fighting for the town of Doiran to fall into Allied hands. When I say heavy, I mean heavy. Like at Pip Ridge, of 3 British battalions attacking Bulgarian machine gun posts, only a third of the attackers made it back to their starting point. So by now, the Allies were advancing into Vardar, but were stopped here, and their flanks were theoretically exposed to an attack by the right wing of the 11th German Army. However, 2 Bulgarian regiments mutinied, so their commander, German General Friedrich von Scholz, who'd been a hero of the Battle of Tannenberg 4 years ago, ordered his reserves commander to go with his staff officers with their guns to stop the mutiny. Well, when they got there, it was clear that most of those Bulgarians were just not going to fight anymore. So he ordered a limited retreat. He appealed to German high command for reinforcements, but the only ones available were the German brigade in Crimea, and it would take them 2 weeks to arrive. So on the 20th, as the week ended, the Bulgarian army was ordered to retreat. And when the British, French, and Greeks advanced again on places like Pip Ridge, they were deserted. This all doesn't sound like so much, but in actuality, the Bulgarians were suddenly in full retreat, not limited. See, the news of a breakthrough past Dobro Pole had led the defenders of Doiran to abandon their positions to prepare for an attack against their homeland, leaving the doorway to Hungary open. They, the Bulgarians, had perhaps the strongest defenses on any front of the whole war, and they were now out of that system and morale had collapsed. Thing is, the Allies did not yet even realize they had broken through. They would not do so until tomorrow, the 21st. But yet another Allied breakthrough came this week on the Western Front. On the 15th, British Commander Sir Douglas Haig met with Generals Henry Horne, Julian Byng, and Henry Rawlinson at Montreux before their next attack. He would need total cooperation between his armies to get within striking distance of the Saint-Quentin-Cambrai main defensive line. Now Rawlinson's 4th Army, with 1 corps of the 3rd Army on their left and the French 1st Army on their right, would attack near Epée. So the Battle of Epée was fought on the 18th. The Allies overran the outer works of the Hindenburg Line, and the Germans were driven back to their main defenses, with as many as 12,000 of them becoming prisoners of war. In the center, John Monash's Australians had pretty complete success, taking all their objectives. Success was far more limited on the flanks, but overall, it showcased that the Germans were weakening. Since August 8th, the British Army had advanced 40 kilometers on a front of 64, and most of that in the past 3 weeks. Compare this to the Somme 2 years ago, when they advanced just 14 kilometers on a front of 30 in 4.5 months. Another result of this week's battle is that German General Georg von der Marwitz was dismissed. According to the official history, it was for the failure of his left wing on September 18th. Marwitz had fought the whole war, beginning with the Battle of Hallen on August 12, 1914. He then went to the Eastern Front and overwhelmed the Russians at the Second Battle of the Masurian Lakes. He then headed south and fought with the Austrians, winning the Pour le Mérite way back in March 1915. It was he who was surprised, though, by the British attack at Cambrai last year, though it was also he who got together the successful counterattack. But just lately, his morale had taken a real hit when his men lost at Peronne to the Australians a few weeks ago. They were desperately tired after being in the lines pretty much endlessly, and desertion was epidemic. He wrote in his diary that 3 whole battalions of an infantry regiment had melted away. Well, he is now relieved of command. Next week, he will take charge of the German 5th Army in eastern France. We may see him again. And this crazy week, of a crazy war comes to an end, with the Ottomans taking the oil city of Baku, though the British have broken through in Palestine. And all the oil in the world won't help the Ottomans if Damascus should fall. The Allies have broken through the Macedonian front and don't even realize it, but they do know what they're doing on the Western front, breaking the Germans bit by bit. Even though I like to keep things suspenseful, it would be hard to overlook or ignore by now that things are looking grim for the Central Powers. 3 of their 4 major battlefronts are falling to the Allies at the same time, and on the other one, the Italian front, the last Austrian offensive was a catastrophic failure. But the war is not over yet, not by a long shot, and for it to end will still take tens of thousands more dead young men. That's the great tragedy this week. Even after all this time, there's still tens of thousands of dead young men to go. If you want to learn more about the Bulgarian defenses at Doiran, you can click right here for our weekly episode where we take a good look at them. Our Patreon supporter of the week is Glennon B. Nelson IV. Woo! Well, Glennon B. Nelson IV, thank you for your support on Patreon. It keeps this show running while making it better and better. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.